This is the second of our series of monthly inspirational talks for 2024, curated for Elevate by our people and culture partners Zoe Tuffs from Times 10, Nic Neal from Nic Neal Consultancy, and our learning partner, Matt Bolton-Alarcón of Special Source Training. This session was expertly delivered by Matt, who's worked for the last 2 decades in learning and development. He's trained thousands of people all over the world from companies like Google, L'Oreal, and Innocent.
Right, so I'm going to kick this podcast off by asking you a question to think about, which is when and where do great ideas come to you? So when and where do great ideas come to you? And I'm not Derren Brown or the illusionists or the mind readers, but I'm guessing you're thinking it's things like in nature when I'm walking, or might be doing a gentle bike ride or something like that, walking the dog. Or it might even be commuting. I'm sat on a train with my headphones on, or walking down a street without the pressure of, the deadline of getting there. I'm just walking down a street that I know. Or it could even be a long car journey. And then a lot of people do say it happens in the bathroom when I'm having a shower, on the loo, whatever it may be. Now, when I've asked that question for, I think, coming up 20 years now to people all around the world, and people go, I think it's when I least expect it. And it feels very much like they can't really control when good ideas come to you. But I think there's a bit more process going on here. I don't think that it just happens by chance, the aha moments, the eureka moments. There is a bit of process. The good news is it's not too structured, and it doesn't have to be overly engineered, but I think we can be a bit more deliberate about that process. So in this podcast, I'm going to try and give you more deliberate tricks to help ideas and useful ideas pop into your head a bit more often. So to help with that, a little story. So I'm going to take you back to the 1940s. Imagine that you're walking in the Alps, the Swiss Alps. There you are, beautiful, beautiful sunny day. And actually you're walking alongside a gentleman called George de Mestral. And George de Mestral loved the outdoors, loved walking in the woods, even did a bit of hunting back in the day. And he was always accompanied by his dog. Apologies, I don't know the dog's name. Let's call the dog Fido, just to be a bit of a cliche. But anyway, and there was one occasion he got back from out there in the woods walking the dog and got back home and noticed that in the dog's fur were some burdock seeds or burdock burrs. And they were very hard to get out of the fur. It caused it was like having to almost rip it off, causing the dog a little bit of, not pain, but definitely some discomfort. Now, George de Mestral was an engineer, so had a microscope at home and actually took these burrs and put them under the microscope and actually noticed that it was the hooks that were attaching to the dog's fur allowed this attachment to happen. And in 1948, he started working on this technology and started to develop what was hook and loop technology. 1955, 7 years later, after lots of development, launched the company Velcro, which in French is velour, velvet, and crochet, the hook. And within a couple of years was a multi-million-dollar business. And I'm sure you're a bit like me, you cannot live without it. So that's an amazing story of, great ideas happening when you least expect it. But there is a bit of process here. So what I want to do is get into the science as to what's going on here. And if we know this science, the brain science, if you will, then we can be a bit more deliberate about creating the right brain conditions to do our very best thinking. So let's just get into it. First of all, it's just to recognize that for most of us, we spend our working day in a busy multitasking mode. We're jumping from one meeting to a meeting. Our diaries look like barcodes turned on their side. So it's just back to back, switching context. And when you're in that mode, your brain is largely operating in the conscious part of your brain, where it's just kind of logic, rationale, jumping from one thing to the other. Now, when we step away from the busyness of work. So by the way, this brain frequency, the busy one, is called, the science is called beta or beta brain frequency. When we step away from the busyness of work, so I'm looking out in my garden now, I go out and do a bit of weeding, even playing a bit of badminton yesterday with the kids. your brain switches off and you go into theta brain frequency, where your mind wanders and your brain actually relaxes. The speed at which your brain is working, and your conscious brain connects into your subconscious brain, and you start to make new and different connections. Now, famous artists in the past have really used this. So Björk, the Icelandic musician, she used to recognize that she had her very best ideas in nature. So she used to deliberately go off walking in the Icelandic countryside, and she would actually write her verses on the uphill of her walk and then do the choruses on the downhill. She used to use the undulation of her walks in order to get that theta brain frequency going, mind wandering state away from the busyness. Salvador Dali used to sit in his very favorite chair at home, and he used to put heavy keys in his hands. And what he used to do is sit in this chair, really relax. And then when he was about to lose body consciousness, the keys would slip out of his hands, land on the floor, and wake him up, and he would capture whatever was in his mind at the time. So very deliberate uses of this mind-wandering state. I noticed this in some offices that I visit. So when I'm out working in Silicon Valley in California, a lot of the campus universities, it's not just because it's cheaper real estate on the outside of cities. It's because it's got a close connection to nature. So I know at Facebook, for example, a lot of important meetings happen on the move because there's lots of green space around the outside of Facebook. Google, I've seen in some of their offices, they've got those sleep pods, which are these little capsules you can pull over yourself just to get away from the busyness, to allow your brain to make new and different connections. So I guess the first trick, I'm going to give you a few tricks today, is at which points of your day are you trying to engineer this mode? Because that is where you do your very best thinking. You are probably, if you listen to this podcast, most of you are knowledge workers. Your job is to solve problems, come up with great ideas. And so you need to engineer this frequency more often in your day-to-day work. And the trick here is to do it guilt-free. I'm just wrapping up just finished a book this week, hot off the press, from Cal Newport, who wrote a book many years ago called Deep Work, where he talks about the problems of infomania and all the distractions that we have when we're sat at our desk. And the most recent work that's just come out is a book called Slow Productivity. And he talks about the fact that being busy, that jumping from one thing to another, that badge of honor about being busy, is what he calls pseudo productivity. It's not being productive at all. It's just appearing to be so. So what we need to do is, he recommends, to have more impact, we need to deliberately slow down, focus on less, which sounds like we're being lazy, but we're not. If we do that, we have more impact. And one tactic in the book, Slow Productivity, which I've actually been trying recently, which is for every meeting that you put in your calendar, let's say it's for a project meeting or a team meeting, it might be a client, catch-up meeting, which are very much, jumping from one context to another. And it's often about doing all those things, all about that, classic productivity stuff. For every one of those that you put in, why don't you put in an equivalent meeting for deep, focused thinking time? Otherwise, days will naturally slip into being busy, barcode diary, calendars, switching context, and you won't get any deep thinking. You'll just get shallow thinking and no new ideas will happen whatsoever. So take a leaf out of the book on slow productivity and engineer those moments in where your mind can wander. And that's where you will do your best thinking. And please do it guilt-free. So yesterday, I actually had a meeting bumped and I decided to go off and go on a mountain bike ride. Now, I use that quite purposely to think about a couple of things. I even listened to an audiobook on the way. And at moments in that ride, I was thinking to myself, I should be doing emails. I should be doing this. But actually, I had a lot of impact from my time out there, got myself a bit fitter. My legs are hurting a bit today, but I was deliberate about it. And the trick is to be guilt-free about this stuff. Fantastic. So that's about the brain conditions that you're operating in when you have your ideas, when you think, I least expect it. Let's now talk about what kind of day do you do your very best thinking. So What I'm going to refer to here is another great book, which was written a few years ago by Matthew Walker. Matthew Walker is a sleep scientist, a neuroscientist, who wrote a fabulous book called Why We Sleep. It's a very difficult book to read, mainly for me, because I was reading it in the evening, and because he mentions the word sleep about every other sentence, it was just triggering me off. So it took me about 9 months to read it, but it is a fabulous read. The Obamas talked about it as one of the most important reads of the last few years. And there's lots of great stuff in there justifying why we need to get good night's sleep. But there's a really interesting study which looks at the world's population and the fact that actually when our brains come alive, when we do our best thinking in the day, it's different for different profiles. So they talk about the fact there's 3 chronotypes. By chronotypes is where your brain comes alive at what time of day. And there's 3 different types of them. The first one are referred to colloquially as morning larks. So people that often come mentally alive at 6 a.m. do their very best thinking there. So Benjamin Franklin's phrase, early to bed, early to rise, very much is someone that would be a morning lark. Now, 40% of us, the world's population, are morning lights. Come alive first thing mentally, do our best thinking there. Maya Angelou, the famous poet and writer, she used to actually book herself into a hotel for 7 a.m. into the restaurant to do her very focused, deep work in a place with little distraction. And then actually only spent the rest of the day iterating the work, connecting with her husband and sharing her ideas because she just did her best thinking then. That's 40% of us. 30% of us are night owls, where actually we become mentally alive later in the day. The classic on this is Pablo Picasso, who would lie in till late morning, have a leisurely lunch, probably have a little snooze after a glass of wine, and then kick in late afternoon to do great thinking there and work into the night. Sounds like very unstructured, but actually over 15,000 pieces of art to his name. So a fairly prolific career from following this process. This just means that there's only 30% of what I call midday hawks. Now, it's just you do your best thinking in the midday, a bit like a hawk does the best hunting in full sun. So isn't it funny how sometimes we're in our working day, we're trying to force our best thinking, force ourselves to be stimulated by the things around us. But actually, it's just not the time of day where we're supposed to do that. So here's another trick to help you with that in order to be a bit more deliberate about having great ideas when you supposedly least expect them, which is give yourself a to think about list. Okay. Now, I'm sure most of you listening have got a to-do list. And I would imagine certain weeks it's got too much on there for you to actually deliver on. It's a busy environment to be in. Now, I challenge you to say, to think about who here has a to think about list. And I'm imagining less people have that. Now, the good news is that any one time, there should be only one thing on your to think about list. Because actually, what you want to be deliberate about is when you least expect it, on that ride, on that commute, on that leisurely walk through a park, you want your brain to suddenly latch onto that thing you want to think about, and it will start to make new and different connections, pop into other areas of your subconscious brain for inspiration, spot the things around you as inspiration. Amazing things happen on the move. If you're quite focused about what you want to think about when you least expect it, your brain is more likely to default there. I helped out a couple of a good old friend, Chris, and one of his associates called David, who did this brilliant idea in London a few years ago that I helped facilitate, which was called Street Wisdom, which was give yourself an hour in your day, focus on a problem, and start to walk around the streets of London to help your brain make new and different connections. It was amazing. One of them that I run, one of the individuals was on there thinking about leaving a big marketing job that they'd been in and very proud of being on. And actually, by the end of the hour, had made a decision to leave the company he was working for, set up as an individual. And even in that time, had come up with a proposition for his work and is now doing brilliant work out there as an independent consultant. So it's amazing what happens if you create that to think about this. Sounds a bit rigid, or this is the one thing I want to think about. But then when your mind wanders, your brain will do amazing things. So I think this was brilliantly delivered. in a story I heard. It's from many years ago, but I just love the story. I've told it many times. And it's actually from the founder of IKEA, or as they call it in Sweden, IKEA, I believe. And it is Ingvar Kamprad, the founder of IKEA. And Ingvar Kamprad had a problem. And it was the fact that they started off by creating the chair. They're brilliant chairs, that the armchair they developed. Then they started going, we should do tables, we should do sofas, other things for the living room. And then over time, it started to move from living room to bedroom to kitchen. And if you think about IKEA now, they do stuff for home offices. They do it for businesses as well. There's stuff for the garden. The list goes on. And Ingvar Kamprad had a big problem, which was that with all this extension of different product lines, it would make a very, very confused retail store, very hard to navigate. And if you put signs up, it creates a very cluttered retail environment. Also, if you create signage like you have in traditional supermarkets, shoppers, you give them choice. They go, I don't want that aisle, but I want this one over here. So they miss some of the collection that they might be inspired by. So Ingvar Kamprad had that as a problem, and he actually logged it into his think about list. Need to consider this. And he happened to be going on holiday to New York. And he actually took the slow boat. I think it takes about a week to head over to New York. So obviously that was a bit of thinking time along the way. But the inspiration happened to come when he was in New York, and he was being a bit of a tourist, and he was going to see the museums, etc., probably taking in a few jazz clubs. But the one thing that inspired him was when he went to the Guggenheim Museum, and he was amazed at the layout, which is you are forced to walk to the top of the Guggenheim Museum. And what you do when you're there is you are given no choice. The navigation around the art collection is in circular mode, and you just gradually make your way in circular mode on a downward spiral, if you will, through to the ground floor. And that's where you end your tour of the Guggenheim Museum. And the very clever bit is before you leave to go street side, return to the busy streets of New York, you have to pass through, guess what? The gift shop. And you probably pick something up on your way out. Now, Ingvar Kamprad thought it was genius what he'd just seen there. And what you'd notice there is that an IKEA store looks nothing like, go and look on Google now, and Google the Guggenheim Museum. It'll pop up with an image that looks nothing like an IKEA store. But there's two principles that he stole from that experience. One is, let's have circular navigation. So IKEA stores, you weave your way around, circular style around the entire collection. You don't make any choice. And then the other principle he stole was the fact that there's the land of temptation just before you leave. You think you spend all your money at IKEA, and then you walk through, you got the onslaught of ice cream, of hot dogs, meatballs, before you actually leave to the parking lot. Now, I just think that is a brilliant example of someone who had a big problem to solve, logged it in their brain, and then actually went on holiday, let their mind wander. And that's where they had that rush of inspiration. And IKEA is one of the most revered store layouts in retail history. So a great example of impact there. So have a to think about list is the next trick for you to work with. For the final principle I want to recognize is just to be honest with ourselves. When we're having these new ideas, it's because we've been stimulated. But our brains are actually hardwired against being stimulated. We are, whether we like it or not, creatures of habit. I don't know if anyone here can confess to taking the same route to work when they go to the office, having a favorite newspaper or platform where they read their news every single week. A lot like me, do you have a bit of a routine in the morning where you make coffee in a certain way before you then head out of the door, and there's a real system that you follow? We love being creatures of habit. And don't get me wrong, this creature of habit nature keeps us efficient. We don't have to question everything in our routine if it makes us efficient in our day to day. But the watch out is that this sometimes spills over into how we work. There was a famous academic who sadly passed away a couple of years ago called Edward de Bono. And Edward de Bono wrote the book seminal work on lateral thinking. It actually came up with the phrase lateral thinking. And in his early work, he talks about the fact that we, over time, the more experience we get around certain subjects, that might be our favorite hobby, right through to our profession, the thing that we've become specialist in or the industry that we work in, we develop these big, what he called rivers of thinking, deep areas of expertise. And the reason why I love the metaphor from Edward de Bono is the river is deep, it's fast flowing, it carries us along with it. And that's what happens to our brains. We just get channeled into similar patterns of thinking that we've done before. So what we need to do is deliberately jump out of those rivers and seek stimulus from other areas. And I'm going to give you like 3 mini tactics to be able to do this that you can do absolutely every single day. So the first one is deliberately change some habits in your day to day. If we are naturally creatures of habit, then actually twist and tweak those habits day to day and see what happens to your brain. Now, there was a study done at the University of Amsterdam many years ago where they put this to the test. They took thousands of people over a few weeks for a very short exercise in problem-solving tasks. So problems where you needed to come up with answers quite quickly when the answers weren't too obvious. So if you will, creative problem-solving tasks. But what they did for the group, it was a controlled experiment. For half of the respondents doing these tests, they made them make their breakfast in the same old way. Okay. Now in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, they have a breakfast that they eat quite regularly, which is called, I'll pronounce it really badly, but I believe it's called hagelslag. And hagelslag is white bread, good quality white bread, toasted with some nice butter on it, and then sprinkled over the top, very good quality chocolate sprinkles. Okay. So effectively, it's chocolate on toast. And they make that, it's not every day, but they'll have that as a bit of a treat every now and again. Traditional breakfast in the Netherlands. So half of the group doing these creativity tests just made their breakfast. They were invited in for breakfast and they made it in the same old way. The other group had the same breakfast, but their method to make it was slightly tweaked. Rather than sprinkle the chocolate over the top, they did it in an upside down style. So they buttered their toast, and then they gave them a plate of chocolate sprinkles, a big bowl for them to do a reverse dunk on, for them to get the chocolate sprinkles on top. Sounds more efficient as well. But just a slight tweak to business as usual, creature of habit kind of nature. And what happened was the group that just tweaked that everyday habit slightly were 25% more successful with their creative problem solving tasks. And the people running the study put it down to just tweaking daily habits. So it doesn't have to be too much. It could just be the route you take to work. It might be the order you make your breakfast in, right through to where you read your daily news. One of those tweaks will prepare you for your brain to make new and different connections. I was working many years ago with BMW in the agency I used to work at. And I heard a great story from their engineering teams, which is once a year, they were taken off working on auto and motorbikes, etc. They were made to go and play around with their engineering prowess in a very different context. So they might be working on white goods, coming up with ideas for new toasters. Now, it's not to say BMW were going to launch the new toaster, although I'm pretty sure that'd be damn good. What it meant was it was tweaking their habits where they were playing around. And I'm sure they would have made some interesting connections to the work that they did, maybe on electric heating inside on their seats or whatever it may be, or on the steering wheel. But the point being, they changed their habits up and got them playing around in a slightly different way. So there we go. Change your habits is a great thing to think about. The other one, next one up, just to get some fresh stimulus in, is collide with other people. I don't know if you're like me, that there are certain people you collide with who you really enjoy hanging out with, but you recognize that the reason why you love hanging out with them is because you actually have a bit of a similar point of view. And it's easy to hang out with them because you say a joke, they laugh. You say a point of view on the world. Yeah, I think that's great. Now, I love hanging out with people like that. That's great. But they are definitely in my echo chamber. And if you want another great book reference on this, Matthew Syed's book, Rebel Ideas, talks about the danger of echo chambers. Being surrounded by super smart people, might be super smart people, similar, but if they've got a similar background to you, see the world from the same perspective, actually, they're just going to echo back similar points of view. But we do love living in echo chambers. We're in the land of elections right now, and we'll all be talking to each other. If we're talking to people of a similar political influence, then we'll be thinking, I know how the election's going to play out. I know exactly what's going to happen. It's just because we're in an echo chamber of that. Now, if you really want new and different ideas, you have got to bust out of your echo chamber. And there's a great read from Brené Brown, which is called Rising Strong. She talks about it as a square squad of people. And her point is, get a small piece of paper. You can do it right now if you like. About an inch square, she says, or a little Post-it note. And write down the names of 4 people on there that are in your network that you know. But the push is that they offer up a challenging point of view. Adam Grant, another great author in this space, talks about the fact you need a challenge network. People that maybe don't work in your industry, people that when you're down the pub, they're that person that offers up really challenging points of view or asks the difficult questions, or they're a bit annoying, a bit awkward. But actually, it's those people that will help make you make new and different connections. I have a friend called Richard, who is definitely not conventional in his thinking. He runs a small, relatively small, very successful e-commerce business. And when I'm developing new material for the workshops I run, I'll just test it by him over a walk or a coffee or a beer. And he'll challenge me on it and go, have you thought about this? Have you read this? And he's a great spark for me for my brain to go to new and different places and make new and different connections. So second trick to stimulate yourself to think differently is who's on your challenge network. Bust out of your echo chamber. Don't just go to the usual suspects for conversation and inspiration. And then the final tip is a bit going back to the story I told of Ingvar Kamprad, which is get yourself off to some new and different places. Whether we like it or not, if we're working remotely, we probably have our go-to place in the house that we're working. I'm lucky enough to have a home office at the end of my garden, which I go to. I've got my little dog Taco next to me, slightly snoring in the background. It's a great space to work, but it is the normal place I go to. If you go to an office, you might be working in a city somewhere. You go and work there, and you're surrounded by the reference points of your organization, your industry. I used to work for a media business, and I used to go to the same place. It was working in radio, TV. It was great fun, lots of good banter there. But we only listened to our own output, which is scandalous, really. We should have been listening to all the competitors and stuff from other countries. So if you go to those same places, you're not opening yourself up to new and different possibilities. So schedule some time in your day to deliberately go somewhere different, where your brain will maybe a bit more alert and spot things of inspiration, make new connections. It might not happen there and then, right in the moment, but I guarantee that when you come back to your desk, you're solving the problems, that inspiration from a slightly more alien world or something that, isn't business as usual, it will definitely feed in to the recipe, the ingredients for you to come up with great new ideas. I heard a great example of this. I was just working with a client a couple of weeks ago in Germany, and Celia, someone who's leading the charge on innovation, part of a team leading innovation in this organization. And it was her job to set up an innovation lab, a space where people could come away from the business as usual, which is a very professional services type environment, and be inspired from different industries, from different tech, etc. And it was her job to develop this great innovation lab. And rather than just look at other professional services spaces or other spaces of inspiration in business, Celia went off and spent an hour wandering around the Science Museum in London because they are brilliant at making spaces, great use of space, great use of tech, and constantly evolving spaces as well, which was some of the inspiration she was looking for. And got back and was inspired by that. Now, it was just an hour out of her day, but I thought it was fabulous that she'd deliberately gone somewhere different to help her brain make new and different connections. So just going back to my question at the beginning, where and when do great ideas come to you? Well, I think it isn't just when I least expect it. I think there's stuff going on here. We're definitely away from the busyness. So why don't we guilt-free get ourselves away from the busyness, allow our brain to be in that more relaxed, hypnotic state, because that is when we do our best thinking. Slow productivity, have more impact by stepping away from the busyness. Second one is have that to think about list, because you never know when your best thinking will come. And actually, it might be it happens in the morning or late at night. So if we're a bit deliberate about what we want to focus on, then our brain will wander and have that great impact for us. And then the other one is be deliberate about stimulating your brain through different habits, colliding with different people, and go to new and different places. And I think then we can be a bit more deliberate to say, ideas don't just happen in a moment of inspiration and aha moment. There's a bit of process behind it, and that's helped me get there. So, final thought. Louis Pasteur, the French biologist, said, fortune favors the prepared mind. So if you want to have new and different ideas, even more impact, be a bit more deliberate about it, and new ideas will come your way. Thanks for listening. Hope this has been a bit of stimulus, a bit of inspiration for you. See you on a future Elevate podcast. Thank you, everyone.
This project is powered by our partners and supporters. We are Collider, PSP, Jack Morton, Powwow Events, Smyle, Special Source, The Hoxton, ABPCO, CastleBell, Event Decision, Live Union, TRO, Nic Neal and TIMES 10 Coaching. Together we're changing lives, careers and the events industry for the better.